All right, so the new Elders Handbook has been out for a few weeks now, known as the 2025 Shepherd the Flock of God book. I laughed, I cried, because I was laughing so hard. The elders shouldn't meddle in personal matters. I mean, come on. But really, just considering their changes that have happened in the past 2 years, you can give a brief greeting to a shunned person. Women can wear pants. Dudes can have beards. You can go to college now. They're not going to give you crap. I don't know, just when the new manual came out, I wanted to see these revisions for myself, or else I'd have zero interest in looking at any of this. But the new SFOG, as I will be referring to it, indicates that the organization is really truly scrambling now in the way that they have restructured and couched their language. It's clear that they know they've effed up. More and more people, members and the general public, are getting hip to them. And, the abuses that they've been able to carry out behind closed doors for so many decades, they're not able to do that so much so anymore. So I just really wanted to look into this. The bulk of it is very dry. I'm not going to go line item through everything, but there are some key highlights that I want to cover. This is going to be longer than usual than I would normally do. And trust me, even then I tried to condense the craziness. So I'm going to be dividing this into 3 parts. Elder 101, key changes, and cult core. Basically what hasn't changed. Elder 101. As the shunned daughter of a veteran elder, all right, my father's been an elder for over 50 years, since the early 70s. I can tell you right now, maybe this is your first time tuning in, Jehovah's Witness elders are not professionals. They have 0 professional pastoral training. All right, they didn't go to seminary. They are not professional counselors, therapists, social workers, EMS. All right, they're not qualified to give marital advice to a raccoon. You could argue that they are the gatekeepers of this club. And, you don't abide by the rules, they kick you out. And by gatekeeper, I mean they can literally open the gate so you can go park by the tennis courts, enjoy your hot towels and Mai Tai. But this isn't a country club. And if it were, the likelihood of you experiencing some sort of human rights violation in the process is pretty damn slim. At most, losing your membership privileges to this club means you don't play racquetball with Tom anymore. Joking, but not really joking, there are rules, and then there's tyranny. And the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses has a legacy of elders abusing their power, exercising an excessive degree of control over people's personal lives, all right, and inflicting very real, irreparable damage to families for generations. All right, a lot of these are lifelong corporate stooges who are now on oxygen or in severe cognitive decline, and unfortunately, thanks to the indoctrinated and often spineless Gen X and millennials who took up the mantle, all right, you see, they are now fathers. They are repeating the cycle. So here we are, reviewing the 2025 edition for how to run a cult smoothly, efficiently, and with minimal backlash from the governmental authorities. All right, so what are some elder requirements in 2025? It says a brother appointed as an elder must be at least 21 years of age. All right, I don't know about you, but when I hear someone say respect your elders, this guy doesn't exactly come to mind. I mean, seriously, elder typically means someone of an older demographic, or at least someone who is significantly senior to you. But in this case, what's happening? You got the old guard that's now dying off. And now you're left with all these young men who, grew up in an entirely different world and culture than grandpa or even dad. All right, my generation was weaned on the internet, and the kids that are graduating high school now in 2025 or whatever, they're 21 in 2025, they literally grew up with an iPhone, shoved in their face when they were babies. Literally, as babies, they had a phone in their face. All of this to say, the younger crowd has access to information that wasn't readily available back in Raymond Fran's time when there was, some sort of degree of clout or status that came with these positions. Back then, there was a core base that really truly believed the end was near. This generation that is living shall never die. There was a genuine momentum that had built up. These men truly believed that they were part of a new frontier, a new world order. But now, too much time has passed. Too many of their prophecies have failed, and now they're scrambling to scrounge up. They're having to lower the age in this new edition because less and less men in the organization are reaching out for these leadership positions. Less and less men are reaching out to be elders. They don't want to be elders. So the organization is just screwed. They don't have the same robust support and interest like they did in decades past. Of course, it is completely absurd for a 21-year-old to be an elder for multiple reasons. All right, one, the human brain isn't even fully developed until your mid to late 20s. And second, this guy was most likely raised as a Jehovah's Witness from birth. Most likely. He knows nothing about life other than the echo chamber he's been raised in. He's been raised in the Watchtower Jehovah's Witness petri dish. Getting his suit tailored is probably the closest thing he's come to a sexual experience, unless he got married by the time he graduated high school. And even then, he is in no position to be doling out marital counseling or life advice to anyone. It's like I got t-shirts older than you. Basically, the role of an elder is a sacred position that you don't take lightly. According to their manual, the primary role of an elder is to shepherd the flock of God. Elders should take a loving and active interest in the spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of others. This is obviously a huge responsibility to place on the shoulders of a 21-year-old kid. And what this is also failing to take into account is how drastically the world has changed. The scene of this world is now changed. Never mind. But really, back in Grandpa's day, all right, a 21-year-old guy could go work at the local factory, and support his wife and 2 kids on a single income. He retired with dignity and a generous pension. Oh, I'm not talking about the witnesses. Today, there are 30-year-old men who can't afford eggs, will never be homeowners, and probably still live with their parents for a variety of reasons. Even the most responsible, all right, conscientious men, good men in the outside world who are working hard, they're struggling. You tell me, what miracle pill are you taking at 21 years old in 2025 that's equipping you with the wisdom, endurance, and quite frankly, the attention span required to care for the spiritual well-being of an entire congregation, most of whom have decades of life experience on you? It's farcical. Okay, so looking at this, yes, elders still control the flow of information. Again, they are the gatekeepers. In fact, it states that any ministerial servants, and these are basically errand boys for the elders, they're not allowed to handle, quote, any confidential information. And the same thing applies to women, of course, who are not allowed any leadership positions of any kind. Like it literally says, be careful not to divulge confidential matters to others, even to your wife. That damn wife of yours. I remember that. My father came home from these elders meetings, and it was all very secretive. It was part of his elder's oath or whatever. And to sort of segue into that subject of elders meetings, it says the meeting should, referring to elders meetings, the meeting should be open and closed with prayer and should be no longer than 2 hours. Now, here in this particular sentence, this section of the manual, they're referring to the private elders powwows that happen after the Jehovah's Witnesses' regularly scheduled meetings or programming. So Jehovah's Witnesses' version of church is called meetings. They don't call themselves church. It's referred to as meetings at their Kingdom Hall. All right, these meetings last from 7:30 to 9:15 during the week. And I wanted to comment on this because, again, some of you might be watching this and you're curious about the inner workings of the higher officials of this cult. I am the daughter of an elder, and I watched my father growing up. My father got up at the ass crack of dawn, worked a hard labor job, was home by 6 p.m., showered, threw on a suit, had to race to the Kingdom Hall to give his speaking assignments or talks. But so he has to give his regularly scheduled talks, and then he would have to cover for whoever canceled. A bunch of guys would cancel their talks or their parts, and so he'd have to give them. So he's like scrambling to orchestrate everything to make sure that the meeting for the whole congregation runs smoothly. And then after the regular meeting for the whole congregation is finished, my elder father would have to go sit in the back room in these elders meetings for another 2 hours, talking about God knows whatever the hell was going on behind the scenes in the congregation that only the elders knew about. And after all that, my father wouldn't get home until midnight. I rarely saw my father. My father was a blue-collar guy who busted his ass to put food on the table, carried the lion's share of the congregation responsibility, and then expended what was left of his last 2 brain cells at the end of the night on a cult that saddled him with other people's trauma and then left him with 0 energy to tend to his own family and even to himself. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Every family has a degree of dysfunction. No family's perfect. Every family has its stuff. But if we were not Jehovah's Witnesses, if my parents were not Jehovah's Witnesses, we would have been fine. We would have been fine. We would have made it work. But the demands of being Jehovah's Witnesses, my father being an elder, added way more stress and strain to our life and our family. That was completely unnecessary. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. They don't get paid. This is not paid clergy. So everything my dad did, not a dime. Never saw a dime. And I know that this might come as a shock to some of you, but my father, he was not a clout chaser. He just wasn't. He didn't care about the spotlight. He was good at what he did, and so the organization wanted to use him, and use him they did. I remember on one occasion we moved as a family in my early 20s to a new congregation, and we were moving to sort of get this, quiet, fresh start in a new congregation. And the second we showed up, they all lost their shit. Oh, thank God he's here. Oh, thank God he's here. He can help us. But my father was not quick to hop on that because he knew what was involved. They wore him down. And he assumed that role again because he had a sterling reputation. And even back then, in the early 2000s, they were having a really difficult time. They were desperate to find men who were, willing to put up with that grueling schedule. But that's precisely the pickle the organization is finding itself in now. Younger dudes, Gen Z or whatever, they're looking at this going, nah, I'm good, thanks. They're looking at this burden, because that's what it is, and going, nah, I want a life. This is not for me. Which leads me to part 2. Key changes. Now, before I elaborate on this, I want to make something crystal clear that the following changes have absolutely nothing to do with empowering the individual, nor did the governing body wake up one morning and go, you know what? Out of the goodness of our hearts, we're going to start being nicer to people. The following changes may give the impression that the organization is becoming more humane or reasonable. But if it seems like they're softening their position, it is only in print, and it is only because they are f***ed. The most notable change that I gleaned from the 2025 SFOG deals with the removal and reinstatement process. First big change, just like they've changed it from disfellowshipped to removed, they have omitted the term judicial, as in judicial committee. They are now using the phrase a committee of elders. And this is just another way of the organization shuffling the papers around the desk as they come under increased scrutiny for the way they have treated their parishioners behind closed doors for decades. All right, in the real world, using the term judicial implies a legal process where the accused is given due process. Put simply, you get the right to a lawyer. There's certain procedures in place before they just give you the chair. You murder someone, well, they have to figure out if you're just a cold-blooded POS, or were you acting in self-defense because that person was trying to murder you? So the fact that they've omitted the decades-long phrase judicial committee from their organizational lexicon tells me that they know the world is watching them now. In 2024, we all remember, Norway yanked their government subsidies when they heard the testimony of now grown adults who were traumatized in these private hearings as minors. Government officials and law enforcement are finally paying attention to the Jehovah's Witnesses. For one, they are learning the organization's dirty tricks through secret recordings that people have made in these private judicial committees, which coincidentally is repeatedly stated in the 2025 edition that recordings of these committees are strictly prohibited, and of course through the court testimony of CSA victims, which I'll elaborate a little bit more later. Governments are finally learning the specifics, of what encompasses a Jehovah's Witness judicial hearing, and they're discovering that the consequences of these elders' sanctions, what happens behind the four walls of the Kingdom Hall, extends beyond whatever nebulous definitions and protections that are granted in the name of religious freedom, and is actually ruining people's lives and families because they're not following proper legal protocols. All right, they got to can that word judicial in print so they don't land themselves in hot water. If they get pulled into a court and the court cracks open the SFOG, all right, is scanning through their official manual, the court's going to go, nothing to see here. They're within their religious rights. They're not breaking any laws. This is a case of sour grapes. People are just bitter. They have the right to kick out whoever they wish. But the fundamental problem with this reasoning is the court at that point lacks the lived experience and doesn't have the intimate knowledge of the culture of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Those who know. Those who grew up in it from birth into their 20s, 30s, 40s know. The organization puts one thing in print to cover their ass and behaves very differently when they're on their home turf. We all know it's a game of semantics. I mean, you see evidence of this, this sort of carefully crafted language in the chapters that deal with removal and reinstatement. For instance, it explicitly outlines in chapter 7 that the elders should be modest and humble. Remember, all of us are imperfect. Kindly help the individual, warmly appeal, and remain gentle and mild with the guilty. It's borderline saccharine. It's syrupy bullshit designed to throw courts off the scent. What I found particularly interesting was this one statement telling elders to be thorough, but not inquire about needless details, especially in regard to sexual misconduct. Why? Because for the past 20, 30, 40 years, you got old codgers in a back room with a yellow legal pad interrogating their parishioners, oftentimes minors, with disgusting, vile, intrusive questions about their body and first sexual experiences, including their own abuse, with the intent to incriminate them and not their predator. How many times did you like it? What were you wearing? What did you do? And then over here, this paragraph that says, repentance involves a deep regret over a damaged relationship with Jehovah, blah, blah, blah. The goal of the committee is to lead the individual to repentance. The elders should be alert to see any sign of heartfelt repentance. This is categorically false. Anyone who has ever been wrongly disfellowshipped, or let's say you did it, you own up to it, and you grovel for forgiveness, either way, you're still treated like a criminal. They want to paint themselves as these merciful shepherds that want to nurse you back to spiritual health, when the reality is the organization attracted a generation of men who didn't have power at the office, didn't have any power in the bedroom, so they took their resentments out on the rank and file, disfellowshipping countless individuals and separating them from their families so they could feel like big men. It's a power trip. Plain and simple. Small man syndrome. But this brings me to my next point, that this sort of chest-beating circle has backfired because the people they did disfellowship don't want to come back. And now the organization is facing a serious retention problem. So I have to tread lightly here because, after all, my channel and activism is centered around Stop the Shunning, and the organization's legacy of shunning minors, people of, one's own family, your own family members. All this shunning has ruined lives. People have unalived themselves because of the shunning policy. But there is something so sweet about choosing oneself and one's sanity and finally walking away from really shitty, toxic people, even if, unfortunately, those people are mom and dad. And that's precisely the conclusion a lot of these removed individuals have come to. They moved on. They made friends. They found love. They had successful careers. One of those, and the trade-off of losing their toxic, indoctrinated family was, a price they were willing to pay, even if, in principle, it's wrong, and no should not be considered an effective means of conflict resolution. But nevertheless, here we are. You gonna shun me? All right. Bye. But this, of course, was not the outcome the organization was hoping for. Oops. Attempting to manipulate grown-ass adults back into submission through what is essentially prolonged silent treatment backfired. And now that the organization is bleeding membership and money, the latest edition has made some really convenient, loving revisions to their previous hard-ass, boilerplate, standard 1-year minimum prison sentence. Anyone who's ever been DF knows you ain't getting out of jail for at least a year. Again, it says in chapter 7, it says, if he is not an apostate or actively promoting wrongdoing, invite him again in 3 months to determine if he has a change of heart. Did you guys catch that? 3 months. 3 months? You got elders still playing hardball after 3 years. All right, if you're hunting down people after 3 months to do your little reinstatement song and dance, it's bad, guys. In fact, if you do a little hippity hop over to clause 22, it says, do not delay in removing restrictions as he recovers spiritually. Imposing restrictions for a prolonged period may discourage the individual. In most cases, some or even all restrictions should be removed before many months have passed. No. I mean, all those years you punished and humiliated people for prolonged periods of time had a negative impact and made them go, F it, guys, I'm not even coming back. You don't say. Now, I'll say that this is specifically referring to reproved individuals. That's like getting a slap on the wrist instead of being fully kicked out. But again, it tells me that they're scrambling to get people back in because for so many years, they cut off their nose to spite their face. Just as sort of a quick sidebar, I've said this before, I've talked about this in previous videos in the past year. If Jehovah's Witnesses took a page from other churches, fine, they can keep their ideological standards and they could still retain their membership if they just put in a little extra effort to take care of their own through outreach programs. Start your own college. Have something for the teens. Have some sort of teen program or camp. It's funny. I know of people here in town where I live, people who waited to have sex until marriage. All right, just stay with me on this one. They're not witnesses. They waited. They love Jesus. Cool. But they were allowed to go to the school football game and hold hands. They were allowed to make out without a chaperone, or fear that they're going to get a judicial ass whooping because someone saw them and snitched on them. Their parents gave them a reasonable sexual education and didn't completely F their head up. These individuals experienced normal developmental milestones without excessive moralistic pressure. And guess what? They managed somehow to live up to their Bible-trained conscience. I firmly maintain if they didn't micromanage their parishioners' conscience and then actually funneled some of those resources back into programs that would foster a desire to stay in the hive, they wouldn't have the problems that they're dealing with right now. Elders are now doling out shorter sentences and practically stalking the inactive, reproved, and removed. The new SFOG illustrates a desperate attempt to rope people back into the fold, but too bad for them. Us evil apostates have the mic now. More people are mustering up the courage to leave because they know they're not crazy for their doubts. And they know there's other people like them who are out there. They know they're not alone. All right, some other things that I noticed while scanning the new edition. I call this cult core since there's no real change here, but it's worth reviewing. It is their official position that CSA is in fact a crime and not just a sin. Elders should never be alone with a minor, that is repeatedly stated. And victims and their families should not be shamed or punished for contacting law enforcement. And also, the two-witness rule has not changed, negating any claims that this organization prioritizes the protection of children. Okay, not only does this sort of abuse never happen in front of multiple pairs of eyes, but to add insult to injury, there's a generous clause that states that if a predator can prove his or her repentance for their reprehensible actions, they still have the opportunity to be reinstated into the congregation where they can go on to find more victims. But I hopped over here and this was funny, and I don't mean ha-ha funny, but I found this statement very interesting where it states that child abuse includes emotional abuse, while in the same breath stating their full intent and threat to remove a minor who is deemed unrepentant from the congregation. It's just another example of them talking out both sides of their mouth. You're literally threatening to kick out a minor. I mean, if you want to talk about emotional abuse, you could argue that showing kids this crazy shit didn't exactly endear them to Jehovah, or pressuring minors to get baptized before they've started menstruating or have the ability to grow facial hair. That could be construed as emotional abuse. Not to mention the inevitable trauma of cutting them off and shunning them when they express that they don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness after said ill-advised baptism. And as usual, okay, they're still obsessed with porn, and this is a case of white bear syndrome, okay? you keep talking about the damn thing, the more people are going to think about the damn thing. However you feel about porn, all right, whatever your feelings are on the subject, the organization is a breeding ground for pornography addiction. They regulate your sexuality and treat adults like children who are incapable of managing their sexual impulses. They drive you to madness, okay? Man cannot live on bread alone, people. All right, you got ripe humans of childbearing age who are suppressing their natural desires for unnatural periods of time. And no, not everyone wants to get married right away. Not everyone wants to be, or is prepared to be, tied down for life just to release their basic biological functions. So, it drives people into the dark. And look, the organization has the right to say their piece on the matter, but then they need to stay out of people's private lives. What you resist persists. And maybe if you just shut up about it, you wouldn't be creating a bigger problem than it would otherwise be. All right, they still haven't changed their blood policy. You can't take blood. You can't divorce and get remarried. They got their hands in that pot too. I've said this before, there's a difference between you just banging someone else's spouse on the down low and there's mitigating circumstances. But every case of remarriage that's mentioned in here is scheming. They use that term repeatedly. The guy just wanted an upgrade instead of the more common reason that he or she got married way too young so they can have sex, realized they were horribly incompatible or stuck in a loveless, even outright abusive marriage, came back around, got a little life experience under their belt, a little bit more seasoned, found someone else who was really loving and good to them that, they are more suited to. And suddenly the new couple, they're the bad guys. So no, they have not budged here at all. Zero room for nuance or compassion. Like I said, for mitigating circumstances. There are step-parents who stepped up, men and women who stepped up for their partner's kids in a way that the bio-parent is incapable of. So no, you shouldn't always stay together for the kids unless you want your kids to grow up in an emotionally volatile household with screaming and their parent disparaging the other parent, which then models for them what intimate partner relationships look like. And then they grow up, end up repeating the same patterns that they learned from mom and dad, and find themselves now in toxic relationships. So again, have not budged here. There was so much to cover in this. If you watched this far, thank you. This could be a 3-hour video easy. This manual is dense with gaslighting and multiple instances of them speaking out both sides of their mouth, which is very on brand for Watchtower. Again, this is just a case of playing musical chairs, changing up language, recycling and regurgitating the same thing so they can still, behind closed doors, they can still pull their stuff, but in print, it looks different. In print, it will shield them from the consequences of governments and law enforcement. But hopefully with more people speaking up, sharing their stories, and more people leaving, finding the courage to finally leave the organization with their families, more people will be able to raise awareness of this issue. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. A special shout out to my channel members for your continued support, and to everyone who keeps tuning in to Stop the Shunning week after week. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to read the 2025 SFOG for yourself, it's out there. Just Google it, and I will see you guys next time.